Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Super review for episode 27, which is called Earth Explodes, the Decisive Kamehameha Wave. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the plot, the action, interesting details, my impressions, my most memorable moments, and I'm now going to add animation to my Dragon Ball Super reviews. And in addition to this, I'm also going to be doing my predictions for episode 28 of Dragon Ball Super, which is called The God of Destruction of Universe 6. His name is Champa. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. Now, in terms of the plot, let me just flat out say that I think they did a fantastic job of squeezing things in. When you consider the fact that Vegeta managed to defeat Frieza in battle, Earth managed to blow up, and Goku came back to stop and ultimately defeat Frieza all in one episode, in addition to the Z Fighters having a party at the end of the episode. That was really interesting, the fact that they could squeeze in so much in the span of 20 minutes. And originally, when I heard that this episode would be concluding the Resurrection F arc, I was actually surprised because Super's pacing has been pretty slow at times. So I think they did a great job, and the plot was pretty straightforward. It's time to basically defeat Frieza, and Super did it in a great fashion. Now, on the subject of the action, I thought the action was fantastic. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I felt that the scenes were a little bit more exaggerating to a better degree, in the sense that we saw Vegeta literally pummeling Frieza for an extended period of time. You really got the effect that Vegeta was really frustrated with Frieza, significantly more in Super as opposed to what we saw in the movie. And I felt that you truly saw Frieza utterly being embarrassed in Dragon Ball Super as opposed to the movie, which obviously had limited time. And I think that Dragon Ball Super did a significantly better job portraying the action sequences with Vegeta versus Frieza. However, in the scene where Goku defeated Frieza with the Kamehameha, I felt it was a little bit less dramatic than the movie, but it was good nonetheless. Now, starting off with the first interesting detail, I wanted to talk about the fact that in Dragon Ball Super, Frieza did not pledge for Vegeta to join him and basically become a member of his military in some sense, and I felt that it was better in Resurrection of F, where Frieza actually tried to convince, Vegeta to actually join him, because I felt that that was more representative of Frieza to do absolutely everything in your power to get somebody on your side, and eventually you could overturn them. That's the sneaky side of Frieza, as we saw during the Namek Saga. So personally, I like that more, but that was one observation I made. The next thing I also wanted to talk about is the fact that Gohan wanted Piccolo to train him once again, which opens up the floor to whether or not Gohan's going to be involved in the next arc. And what I found interesting about this is the fact that Gohan's asking Piccolo to train him, which is kind of going along the concept of, well, he's asking a person who's weaker than him to basically train with him, because it still seemed like Piccolo was weaker than Gohan in this arc. So that was kind of interesting. I would have actually expected Gohan to ask Goku to train with him, or possibly trying to go train with, Beerus and Whis, but obviously you could say Gohan's too weak for that. So that was one thing I noticed. And last but not least, I also noticed that Piccolo was not shown being revived with the Dragon Balls, and I personally dislike this, because I feel like if you're just going to show Piccolo, coming later on during the party, it just makes his death feel useless, because it's like, oh yeah, well, Piccolo was just wished off the screen. It's like, yeah, he just died for a small bit, but then we just brought him back with the Namekian Dragon Balls. No big deal. Death means nothing, and I felt that it was like kind of a cop-out, because like, wow, Piccolo just died for, just a few episodes just to add a small amount of tension and just come back. But once again, I also noticed that Piccolo was shown eating in this episode, as we saw like a plate of food, or at least it seems in his hand. And I felt that this whole thing adds towards the Namekian rule of whether or not Namekians can eat or not, and that is a future topic for another day, but that's another observation I made in terms of Piccolo. Now, in terms of episode animation, and I'm going to be adding animation towards all of my reviews now, I felt like this episode was decent. It wasn't great. There were some points where characters had derpy faces, and I'm going to show you a featured picture for that. But, it was decent. It wasn't great. It wasn't fantastic, but it got you through the episode, and it didn't look as bad as some other episodes we've seen, like episode 5, episode 9, episode 24, 5, and 6. I mean, those episodes had clearly bad animation in terms of stretches of bad faces, and, the animation was just cheap. But this episode, it was passable and it was decent, but not great. It could be better. Now, in terms of impressions, I want to say that this episode is a very well-contained and plot-provoking episode, as I mentioned before, but there was one thing about this episode that really gave off a very sad, intense feeling that Resurrection of F didn't do. And this would be when the planet is exploding and we got to see the characters right before they died. And I felt that that scene was very powerful because in Resurrection of F, we just saw the planet blow up. And, you know, seeing that final look on their face before they died, it truly added a feeling of sadness. And I feel that when Goku came back and defeated Frieza, it really gave you a feeling like, yeah, take Frieza down. You know, look at what this monster, you know, was about to do. He was about to kill all these people, and I felt that was a very, very powerful scene. So with all that said, it was a very well-contained episode in terms of its impression, and it was very sad and intense. And at the very end, it was very happy and lighthearted, where we saw Piccolo come back, and we obviously got to see all the Z Fighters celebrating, you know, for obviously defeating Frieza. So that's what I think about the impressions. Now, in terms of memorable moments, this episode had 2, and I know you guys are used to me doing 1 memorable moment. But the memorable moment of this episode that I would start off with is the fact that when we see Frieza in hell, I'm laughing just thinking about it. We see how he's basically in that cocoon once again, and how we're seeing like all the fairies and, you know, all the other afterlife creatures just looking at him, just laughing, and they're welcoming Frieza back to hell. And I was thinking to myself, well, you know what, Frieza? You might be in a horrible position for yourself once again, but guess what? At least you're not metal this time. I thought that was a very funny scene that they added, and it was very humorous that we didn't get the chance to see that in Resurrection F. And also, the other memorable moment, and I didn't miss it, would be when Trunks is basically saying, oh man, if I get a chance to see Frieza, I'm gonna cut him in half. And that was like an inside joke because obviously we know future Trunks killed Frieza, so it's kind of like a twist on the whole Dragon Ball Z history thing. So I felt those were definitely my 2 most memorable moments of this episode, alongside the other one I mentioned for the impressions section, where I talked about, you know, the characters looking up at the light as, you know, they're about to die and Earth explodes. So those are my memorable moments of this episode. Overall, when you're taking everything into consideration, I'm going to have to give this episode 5 stars, as this episode actually accomplished something major. The animation was decent, and there was a feeling of sadness and tension, which really makes Dragon Ball more powerful, and the action looked pretty good. So with all of that said, this episode has a great replay value, and it's definitely worth watching again, and I'm going to have to give this 5 stars. It truly deserved the 5-star rating this time, and Super definitely has redeemed itself because the Resurrection of F arc has been weak. But that's not all in this video, guys, as I am going to be doing my prediction segment on this episode, as I'm now going to be combining my predictions along with reviews into the same video. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the next episode, episode 28, which is called The God of Destruction of Universe 6. His name is Champa. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is the major event. Now, obviously, since Champa is in the preview, we know that he's going to be the central focus of this episode. And this episode is going to focus on introducing his character, personality, and its relation to Beerus, alongside Vados, while Goku and Vegeta are training, as we were seeing them in their way to close. So I think that's pretty much what's going to include the major events. In addition to this major event, I think another thing we're definitely going to see is the fact that Whis will most likely explain the lore between episode 6 and 7. I'm sorry, universe 6 and 7, where we will see, you know, obviously how Beerus and you know, Champa are related, what Vados is to Whis, and, you know, kind of the whole origin story. And maybe they might add some additional things, and credit to Geekdom for reminding me on that. Now, in terms of character development, it seems like Goku and Vegeta will be the bystanders in this episode as everything is taking place. And I can't really see Vegeta and Goku really having a major role, because this episode looks like it's going to be dialogue heavy. There's going to be a lot of talking, no real action. So I know that for those of you who might be expecting a more action-packed episode, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to see that much, maybe besides a few training sequences. And we also saw a little bit of a scuffle between Beerus and Champa in the preview, so I'm not really expecting a lot of action. But with everything else said, guys, I'm very, very happy that Battle of Gods and Resurrection of F are over. I know I'm a big fan of Dragon Ball. I love everything related to Dragon Ball, but quite honestly, I was really waiting, even before the first episode of Dragon Ball Super, for these arcs to end so I can get to the fresh, new content. I don't know what's going to happen, and that's the best part of Dragon Ball, when you're seeing something that you don't know is going to happen, and you're not just comparing it to 2 movies. So With all that said, I hope you guys like my review, guys, and tell me if you guys like me squeezing in, some quick predictions into my reviews instead of actually making a separate video for those. And I hope you guys enjoyed. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and the best of Dragon Ball Super is just getting started.